So today I want to start by telling a little bit of a story of a boy named Adam. He's about 6 years old and he's the son of Laura and Dan. And Laura is deaf, Dan is deaf, Dan can hear, and Adam is also deaf. And so this is a little bit of an image of their family. It's a fake family. They're stock photos, but just to kind of put visuals to names. And so around the time that Adam turns 6, he gets the opportunity to have something called a cochlear implant. But this opportunity for him to potentially be able to hear better actually ends up causing his family complete turmoil. Now, the story is one about the controversy about cochlear implants in the deaf community, and so some of you may have heard of cochlear implants before but not known that they're controversial. I first learned about this controversy when I was in high school. I was part of a play called Sweet Nothing in My Ear, which is actually where I got those characters' names from. That play is about those characters. So as you can see, here's me, here's our cast, here's my high school. And I also learned about it in high school because I volunteered at a camp for those with special needs. And this is Lori. Although you can see she's physically impaired, she also has a cochlear implant, and I worked with her 2 summers in a row. So I was able to learn more about her experience as well. And I wish that she or somebody else who has a cochlear implant could be here and talk to you more about the controversy revolving around them. But I know that when I learned about it, it was super impactful. So although I can't give as much justice to it as somebody else might be able to, I just would love to be able to share a little bit about what cochlear implants are first off, and then why they're controversial. So, first off, they were made in 1957, and they are the first attempt to elicit sound sensations to a deaf listener using an electrode planted in the ear. Today, more than 30,000 people have them, and they're different from hearing aids. Hearing aids just amplify sounds, whereas this is recreating sound in a sense. So there's 2 pieces to a cochlear implant. There's an external piece and an internal piece. The external piece basically sends messages, a radio signal, to the internal piece, and the internal piece has 12 to 22 electrodes around this part of the ear, which is called the cochlea, and each one of the nerve fibers that an electrode is attached to has a different frequency that it helps people hear. And there's a whole lot more of science there, but that's kind of the overall gist of how that works. So it sounds like a great idea, right? So why is it controversial? So it's controversial for medical reasons, first of all. It's a pretty invasive procedure, and typically where the controversy comes up is, say for example, there are 2 hearing parents and they have a child who is deaf. And they immediately go, okay, we want our child to be able to hear better, so they're going to get a cochlear implant. It's a very invasive procedure because it's not just involving the ear, it really is getting close to the brain and all of that it can cause many medical difficulties. And the National Association for the Deaf says it's an invasive surgery on defenseless children without scientifically establishing long-term physical, emotional, and social impacts on children, without proving evidence of their enhanced performance. There hasn't been a ton of studies on how cochlear implants help. For some people, they're super effective. For other people, they're less effective. Also, the age that you get a cochlear implant at affects how effective it is. And so that's why that's controversial. And the other piece is social. And the reason it's socially controversial is because of something called autism, which is called discrimination or prejudice against individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. So essentially, what that means is if, for example, a child is born deaf to hearing parents, going back to that example, the deaf community has a lot of pride, and a lot of times they don't even want to be able to be seen as disabled. And to kind of be able to make that a little bit more clear in an actual story sense, if we go back to Sweet Nothing in My Ear, Laura was the mom who was deaf. And so her family, you also find out that her father and her mother were both deaf, so it was definitely a culture they were around. ASL, American Sign Language, is super important to them. And so she has a fear that Adam, if he got a cochlear implant, her son, would never be fully a part of the deaf community, but also would never be fully a part of the hearing community, because even when being able to hear a little bit more with the cochlear implant, he would still have a speech impediment and it would still be difficult to communicate. But from Dan's perspective, he wanted his son to have a cochlear implant because he wanted a stronger connection with his son, wanted to be able to communicate in a different way. He wanted his son to be able to have a normal life, theoretically, or better opportunities, and also for safety reasons. Say there's a car coming down the street, he wanted his son to be able to hear that. But it's not always extremely controversial. If I look at my friend Lori, she says that she was so glad I'm so glad I received my cochlear implant so I can talk with my hearing friends and family. I was happy to chat on FaceTime. My parents and other families are very happy that I have it. But she talks about chatting on FaceTime. We communicate. She uses ASL and spoken language, but her English is definitely, she has an impediment when she speaks. So that's why we use FaceTime, so we can use a little bit of both. She also says that part of that is because she had hearing loss as a child. She wasn't born completely deaf. She became completely deaf around age 25, and that's when she decided to get the cochlear implant, because she thought that it would improve her communication with others. And for her, she says it's beneficial to be able to communicate with those who don't sign, and she also loves listening to music. And this is a picture of me playing music for the cabin that I was at when I was with her. But the reason I show this picture especially is to look at her location. She can't understand the words that I was saying. She can understand the lyrics or articulations because it's not just amplifying sound with the cochlear implant. So basically she could still hear the vibrations and certain notes, but couldn't 100% hear what I was saying. So where she's at in that picture, she's looking at the words that I had written out of the lyrics that I was singing. So, as a whole, I hope that you guys have learned a little bit more about the controversy. There's a whole lot more layers to it, but that's kind of just scratching the surface of why they're controversial and what they are. And I think that it's important to talk about, one, in case you guys ever meet somebody who has a cochlear implant or is considering getting one or is a part of the deaf community, to understand just a little bit how important being deaf is to people who are deaf and how they don't see it necessarily as a disability, and also just as a whole, because I think we all want to be understood. And so I think seeking to understand other people before we jump to conclusions about the decisions they're making is super important. And so in the case of cochlear implants, that even those who can't hear themselves deserve to be